Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our art talk this evening regarding the exhibit Uncanny Terrain in our main gallery at Greenville Center for Creative Arts. For those of you who have stopped by, you know how magnificent this exhibition is from the two artists, Maja Godlewska and Bryce Speed. What you may not know is they have never met each other or had their work displayed together, and I think it is quite remarkable how good their work blends in our gallery space. Some who have been around for a while with GCCA have said that this is the most beautiful exhibition we have ever had in our space, and it certainly is gorgeous. So if you haven't been out to see it, we really encourage you to come. We'll be talking with the artists tonight to get a little bit of insight behind how they create their work and the inspiration for it. And we will be opening it up to questions and answers at the end. So the first part, about 30 to 40 minutes, will be a facilitated conversation with Maja and Bryce. If you have questions that you'd like to post in the chat, please feel free to do so. And then we will also have time, if you'd like at the end, to ask your questions personally of the artist by unmuting. So just a little bit of housekeeping right now. Please do mute yourselves, except for obviously Maja and Bryce. And we will go ahead and get started. In addition to welcoming you all and thanking you for being part of this program tonight, I always want to take a moment to give a shout out to our most generous sponsors who sponsor this exhibit as well as our art talks. We actually have Laird Green from Abacus on the call with us tonight. She is one of the ARTalk sponsors that have sponsored our art talks now for several years, and they sponsor every art talk that we have throughout the year. So thank you to Abacus and to Laird for being such dedicated supporters of our mission and this type of programming, which really helps to bring the exhibitions to life in a more personal way. Also want to thank the exhibit sponsor, On Point Financial and Controller Services, also a very good partner with GCCA. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get started. And I have the great pleasure of introducing our two exhibiting artists, Maja Godlewska and Bryce Speed. So I'll tell you just a little bit about them. And believe me, I could go on and on about these two very accomplished artists. So what you're hearing in their bios is just a snippet of all they have accomplished. Bryce Speed is an assistant professor of art and painting at the University of Alabama. He earned a BFA in painting and drawing at the University of Mississippi and an MFA in painting from the University of Alabama. His work has been included in numerous exhibitions over the past several years, including solo exhibitions at Valdosta State University in Valdosta, Georgia, and the North Wall Art Center in Oxford, England. In 2006 and 2011, his work was selected for publication in New American Painting Southeastern and Western editions. Bryce is represented by the Cole Pratt Gallery in New Orleans. Welcome, Bryce.
Thank you.
Maja Godlewska is an associate professor of painting at the Department of Art and Art History at UNC Charlotte. She received an MFA in painting at the E. Jeppert Academy of Art and Design in Wrocław, Poland. Maja's work has been exhibited internationally in numerous solo and group shows at venues including the APT Gallery in London and the Creta in Rome. She has also been a recipient of numerous grants and fellowships, including the Fulbright Fellowship and North Carolina Council Fellowship Awards. In addition, Maja has participated in artist in residence programs in the United States, Chile, France, Spain, Iceland, Greenland, Mauritius, Tasmania, and South Korea. Wow. So good to have you here, Maja, and welcome. I always like to start out with a little bit of an icebreaker question that can help us get to know you and your work a little bit better. So I'll pose this to both of you. You know, both of your work reflects the natural world, not as a realistic depiction of the landscape, but in an abstracted sense, as you can see from the image on the screen. When did this focus on environment and nature emerge in your work, and why did you choose to represent it in this style? Maja, do you want to take the first call at that?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Kim and Ben, and thank you, Bryce. Thank you for having me at GCCA. This is such an honor. So about the environment, about the landscape, I was a grad student in Poland in the 80s, and it was a communist country, and I saw a photograph of Yosemite in National Geographic, a famous one by Ansel Adams, and I decided I have to see this place. I just couldn't believe the beauty. So I bought Greyhound passes in Europe, in Poland, and I traveled in the United States in 1989 on Greyhound bus for, I think, 4 months, visiting national parks and state parks, and among them Yosemite Valley. And that was I think that was my first series of paintings that resulted from that trip, that was devoted to the landscape, to nature. It was my MFA show. So I think that was the beginning. And fast forward in 2018, I tried to recreate that trip, and I traveled in my car this time with a tent, and I was camping all the way from North Carolina to Seattle and back. For 2 months, looking at the landscape again, and this time looking at fellow travelers, looking at tourists. And the second part of your question, or actually maybe the first part, about the abstraction and the specific language that I use to communicate my fascination with the nature, with the landscape. I think it's the way to perhaps show the totality of the experience. I don't think that the realistic depiction would do that. So I think it's a totality of an experience, as opposed to what a photograph could do, what we do with our smartphones, our cameras, documenting the view, documenting the landscape, taking snapshots from quickly encountered destinations. So I think it's a way of perhaps defying this. I want to make it slow. I want to make it complex, and somehow relate to what we perceive as the chaos of nature. And I was thinking about your question. I was also thinking about William Turner, a romantic painter in Great Britain, and the way he was expressing the light, the sense of the place, the moment. Perhaps one of the first painters who did that, avoiding a very literal translation or depiction of nature.
Very interesting perspective, and why I love these programs so much. Thank you. Bryce, how about you?
Yeah, I initially became interested in the environment as it relates to my work through natural disasters, and particularly through Hurricane Katrina. My parents lived through, survived Hurricane Katrina, and I was visiting them afterwards and was just completely overwhelmed that a storm could do so much damage. And then, of course, the journalistic photos started coming out, and the videos, and just the sort of sheer impact of that storm, the wave heights, the miles and miles of inland flooding, really influenced my work for many years afterwards. I did a series of wave drawings, and as I started developing that work, I became more interested in, well, how could a storm like this even, what happens to get to this point for this sort of storm? Is it cyclical? Yes, probably. But then I started thinking about the aspects of climate change and that sort of impact, and became interested in that that side of the story. And then again later, after the BP oil spill in 2010, which was the largest marine oil spill in the history of the world, I believe. And those two events really kind of tugged at my heartstrings, I guess, being from the Gulf Coast, in a way that really told me that I had to make work about this, and that I could not ignore this really any longer. And so I did. And so the work began to take on aspects of these events, and in relation to abstraction, particularly, which is the second part of the question. I think I chose to represent these ideas this way because I'm interested in the coexistence of the painted form, what that brings, the history of that, as well as this ability for painting to communicate some sort of concept. And particularly, I'm interested in how that form can sort of hold those ideas in a way. I think particularly abstraction, when I think about abstraction, it's very appealing to me because it sort of allows one to be in the painting. It allows the content to be in the painting. And it also has this sort of form that can, in a way, stand on its own if the person and if the story isn't there to kind of inform it. So I think abstraction's really rich in terms of that sort of object physicality that I'm interested in as well. And it also, I think, ultimately allows the viewer to maybe be able to formulate a question or walk away with a question instead of a kind of a literal conclusion. So yeah, that's how I kind of find myself working in abstraction.
I love that walking away with a question concept. That's really fascinating. And I mean, you know, because I've read about both of you and because you've been in front of my purview for almost 2 months now, it's obvious that your work connects to environmentalism. So Bryce, you know, you gave me such a nice transition into this question. Are there any themes that you hope the viewers take away with them looking at your work, whether they understand that connection or not?
I would hope that a takeaway would be that if someone reflected just on their own relationship with nature and the environment, if my work could do that, I would be most thrilled, I would say. And I think about what my own takeaway is from work in the same vein. Which often makes me think about my own, my own self again in relation to nature, my footprint, and just kind of revisiting that idea of our place in the world and how we are related to climate change and what we're doing sort of collectively, and just maybe as a reminder that the way that we have been living, myself included, is causing the planet to warm in pretty unhealthy and detrimental ways. So I would just hope that the work was sort of a kind of a reminder, I think, that that this is real and that something's going on. And maybe that idea of walking away with a question is that they walk away with a question about something that they could further think about or further explore or even do to help.
Wonderful. Maya, how about you? Any messages you hope people take away?
Well, I like the idea, Bryce's idea about questions rather than answers. So I think a lot of the works in the show that I'm showing, they are a result of my travels to destinations where I went to also look at other people going there to capture a glimpse of something that will be soon gone. So, so tourists visiting places like Greenland to look at icebergs, people going to Iceland, or people going to Mauritius to look at so-called wilderness or remnants of the pristine jungle. So I think there is a certain sense of melancholy in my work, because I'm aware that maybe at the moment when I'm painting something from my memory, this particular place looks different, or maybe the trees are gone already. So this constant change and flux and a fleeting beauty of the world is definitely what I'm interested in. So in many of my paintings, you see the observer, you see the tourist taking a snapshot. And I think people are really trying to visit those places that may be soon gone before it's too late. And this lone traveler to me also symbolizes in a way our very anthropocentric views of the nature, that in Western cultures where of course they began with Christianity, but then they were reinforced during Enlightenment in 18th century, when we really decided we need to conquer the nature, control it, shape it, change it, and it made us arrive where we are today.
Yes. So Maya, I'd like to talk with you just a little bit about your work and the process behind it. So in the show, you have large wall hanging paintings as well as the large curling watercolor paper installations that stand on the floor. Can you share with us how you began moving from wall hangings to the floor standing pieces, and why the placement of each piece is so important in the overall body of work?
So while I was working for majority of my creative life on canvases, I was also producing hanging textile installations in the past. We don't have any photos there, but they are on my website. They are easy to find. So they have the form of vertical scrolls, and they were inspired by the theme of clouds and weather. And they were very ethereal and translucent. But I think moving to the paper scrolls, there are two reasons. One of them was very mundane and very prosaic, but I'm going to share it. I was an artist in residence at the studios of Key West a few years ago, and I had a very small studio without proper ventilation, and I knew I had to work in some way that I would need to use water-based paint and be able to work on us in a small space. So this roll of paper that I could unroll, work some, roll again, and then unroll next section was just a very practical solution. But then during my travel across the United States, when I was camping, I visited many slot canyons, which were always on my radar, Antelope Canyon and others. So they really inspired those installations, those meandering walls and surfaces that you examine and are intricate and you move across and then kind of unfold in front of you. So they are inspired by the canyons, definitely.
And I know that I just happened to have the pleasure of stopping by the Art Center on the Saturday when you were setting up your exhibition, and you say that you select the locations of the different watercolor scrolls depending on which gallery you're in. How do you determine how you design those when you're in the space, and how much you unfurl?
I think the process is very intuitive. I know it's hard to explain when somebody says, "Oh yeah, it's an intuitive process," but depending on the size of the space, the installation would be bigger and smaller, and I would show a large mass of scrolls together, or they would be separated into smaller islands. And I think here the dynamic of the exhibition was such that we had paintings of various dimensions. There was Bryce's work. So I really felt like I need to have kind of compact, defined islands spread throughout the gallery in such a way that they would interact with what's behind them, with the work on the wall, without obscuring too much, and having this kind of sense of the multi-layered vistas, just as you would have in the real landscape when you have objects at different distances, and as you walk, it unfolds in front of you.
It's a wonderful effect. It's just beautiful.
Well, it's a wonderful space to work with.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Bryce, we'll move a little bit into your work now too, and your process. The work that you included in Uncanny Terrain is painted in acrylic. Why did you choose to paint in acrylic, and why has that become your primary medium?
Well, I really appreciate the versatility of acrylic. It can be very flat, it can be textured, it can be super synthetic and fake looking, or it can be very organic, washy, like watercolor or oil. So it's I will say I not really trying to imitate those other mediums, though it certainly does that. But I think particularly for me with the hard edge work, there is also a kind of practicality as well to my work, in the sense that working with the stencil or working with the cutouts, the acrylic really gives me this, well, it has this tendency to want to go flat, and I'm really interested in flatness on the picture plane. So I respond to that ability that acrylic has to be sort of flat and graphic. And what I am trying to do is I'm trying to kind of play those opposites off of one another. Like in this piece, for example, there's an indication of a kind of organic wash or field of color. And then I think about those hard shapes, which look like collage, but are actually painted as sort of invading and sort of in duality in a way with those underlayers. So yeah, so I like acrylic for all of those reasons. I think it can be, I think of it sometimes almost as kind of a metaphor for like us invading the natural world in a way, like, again, because of its sort of plasticity, its tendency to have these more synthetic qualities and colors, and it and so I think about that non-organic versus organic quality, and I'm interested in that in relation to my work, because I think I'm trying to talk to both of those things in some way. Also, you know, in terms of material, I think acrylic has this way of, much like oil, sort of creating a sense of light in the painting. And I think a lot about light, and I think a lot about space, and how sort of color, space, and light really are so closely related. And so I think about that in terms of like trying to create depth, but then also having this very flat, like frontal element. So the acrylic allows me to do all of those sort of things.
Well, and if you've seen the work in person, which if you haven't and you're listening in, I strongly encourage you to do. The show closes on the 26th of this month, so please do come by our open gallery hours every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from 1 to 5. Starting June 1st, we're going to be reopening more broadly from Tuesday through Saturday. Tuesday through Friday will be open 9 to 5, and then Saturdays we will be open from 11 to 3. So that will give you increased opportunities to see this wonderful work up through the 26th of June. But Bryce, you know, when your work was first hung in the gallery, our program director and I were walking around and, you know, just looking at the different layers. And that's what's really the most fascinating part about it that doesn't come through in the pictures that you're seeing. And we were really wondering, I'm not an artist myself, but it was like, how did you create that look? So how do you get the paint to appear translucent and fluid, but then also thick and opaque in the same painting? Like you said, it does have sort of a collage type of look when you get close up.
Yes, I will sort of go back to that idea of light for a moment. I think about, for me, a transparent moment in a painting can serve as a kind of light source, in the sense that you can still see through it and you can see behind it. So I've become interested in what I sort of think of as passages or transitions where a painting may have, as you're saying, these sort of opaque moments that sort of close the space off in a way, and then these more open moments where the eye travels backwards into the painting. And a lot of that sort of is physically just the amount of medium and water. Pigments themselves tend to be either leaning opaque or leaning semi-transparent. So through this sort of balance of choosing the pigments, choosing areas to remain washy, and then choosing areas to completely kind of close off, I think is what's giving that effect. I think it also enhances the effect of space as well, in the sense that the flat, more opaque shapes tend to sort of sit on the surface, and the transparent areas tend to kind of breathe or create an atmosphere or open the space up in a way. And my process, the way that I work, that's always kind of the beginning, is what's the field going to look like? What's the atmosphere going to look like? And that often comes from a memory of a play, a loose memory. It might come from a journalistic photo that I saw on the, loosely saw on the Weather Channel, or it comes from all these different sources, or just even imagination sometimes. And then I begin to think, how much of each of these things am I going to have? And that's sort of the foundation for the beginning of the work, is almost like putting a puzzle together.
Well, you did a really great Instagram takeover on our account a couple weekends ago, and it was just fascinating to actually watch you do that. You did a tremendous job, and thank you for sharing that with our audience through social media. Appreciate that.
Thank you. It was fun.
And Maja, obviously people have just been enthralled by the beautiful fluid designs on your large watercolor paper scrolls. And it looks like you did it all at one time, but can you explain a little bit about the process of how you conceptualize and then complete those large works?
So I would say that each individual scroll is inspired by a particular place. And I do have a lot of photographs that I take in different locations, and I look at them a lot. But then when I start to draw on the paper and then paint, I don't look at the photographs anymore. So the work is truly based on my memory of the place, and I work section by section. My studio is not large enough to unroll the entire 10-yard roll of paper at once. So I would say it's approximately maybe 2 yards at a time max. And I draw, then I paint, and I use variety of techniques. I'm using acrylic inks, fluid acrylics mixed with water. And there's a lot of chance involved, even though the drawing is quite precise. Later on, I wet the paper, so the initial layer of the ink would spread in a way that I don't control really. And I have a variety of tools, from little eyedroppers to small brushes to huge brushes. And so I developed this multi-layer way of working. And I would say that they seem maybe quite fluid in the transitions, but I think you can really tell these were different sections, these were different days, there's different mood. And I think of them as meditations on the landscape rather than depictions of the landscape. And I think this is how I would like the viewer to respond to them, as slow meditations. So you are in the landscape, you are in the moment, you sit and observe and absorb, and you're not taking photographs, you're not doing anything. You have time and you just are. And I think maybe this is the hardest thing to do for us these days, just to be in a place. But I was also thinking that the pandemic, COVID-19 and the lockdown, I think it allowed many people to slow down and spend some time outdoors, be in the park, walk in the neighborhood, and take in the nature, even if it's just an urban small park.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Yes, they are just beautiful. So my last question in the facilitated part of the discussion is, for both of you, what are you excited about right now with your work? And can you give us a little taste of what might be next? Bryce, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I'm pretty content in the area that I'm working in terms of process. What I would like to further do and see the work become is just a little bit more articulated, kind of in terms. Right now I've been thinking about scale. I was out of the studio for a week, and prior to that I was sort of stumbling with these paintings, and just I had made some larger paintings, and after a week of reflection on them, the word scale kept coming to me. And how could these shapes that I'm working with, how could they get even more sort of deliberate, but also maybe thinking about maybe more moments of delicacy in some of the work, and just how the shape, the scale of the shapes relate to the larger pieces, I think is what I'm currently sort of thinking about. I have also been working on some animation, which is totally out in left field for me, but I'm interested in what some of this language might look like as a moving image or as a small animation. And so I've been working on the drawing on the iPad and playing around with some of that lately. Yeah, I'm most excited just sort of about continuing to focus the work that I'm making, finding those sweet spots, and sort of finding something new in what it is that I've been doing for a while.
Great, thank you. And Maya, how about you?
So I have an unfinished project and I'm excited about it, but it was delayed mostly by COVID. And in 2019, I was in Tasmania at the University of Tasmania, working with a collaborator and collaborating with 30 participants from local community, and they were working on a scroll that was combination of painting and drawing. And the idea was that let's talk to people that actually live in those so-called destination landscapes. That's how I call them, those places that are so incredible. Everybody wants to travel there, but actually people live there and they have this beauty in their backyard. And let's talk to them and see what they have to say and how the landscape is part of their memories, of their childhood memories. So there were 30 participants from the age of 4 to I think 84, and they worked together. And my collaborator Marek Ranis and we just served as facilitators. And so they were working on a scroll. It was shown later in the gallery, but we also recorded interviews with all of the participants, and we filmed on location in Tasmania, and this is still unedited. So so this is what I'm excited about. I was looking at the footage the other day, and I'm so ready to start doing that. And my experience with video is really minimal. I usually I would work with an editor. I'm not going to do it myself, probably. I don't have a patience, first of all. So this is I think this is the next project.
Well, that sounds fascinating. You will have to let us know when that comes to fruition, because I would love to see that. Sounds
I
wonderful.
will, and I'm really excited about letting other people tell their stories and just maybe support them when they do that. It was a wonderful experience.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm sure that we have lots of people that would like to ask you both questions. So we'll go ahead and open it up to our audience here. And if you all have a question, if you just want to unmute yourselves and feel free to ask. And then when you're finished, you can remute yourself.
Hi, I have a question for you. It's Ben, Tarkson, Gallery Manager. I have a question for you. When you're installing your work, it's obviously on watercolor paper, those installations. Does the fragility of them, the concept of fragility as a physical object, does that kind of go into your idea at all, your grander concept?
I think that's an excellent question. I don't think it did in a very conscious manner. But I'm well aware that they may not survive many exhibitions. There is wear and tear involved. You know, it's just paper and it's unprotected. They are standing. If somebody bumps into one, it will fall over and it may tear. So I think part of me is fine with that. I'm not sure if I consciously made a connection between the idea of the fragility of the nature, but maybe subconsciously I did.
Susan, it looks like you have a question also. You're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm thinking about Bryce's work, but it might go both ways. How does the concept, elaborate more on how the concept gets across to reflect to the viewer's relationship with the environment? I thought that was, that's really interesting. And I feel like it ties together with Maja's work, where she did have the viewer in the work, viewing the environment. And then Bryce thinking about the viewer outside the work, viewing the environment. Maybe Bryce could talk about that a little bit.
Good to see you, Susan. Thanks for
Hey,
coming.
Bryce.
I would say, in relation to that question and sort of thinking about the role of the viewer and some of the things that was touched on earlier, as Maja was saying, I think that just to be able to get someone to sort of slow down or kind of decompress for a minute within the gallery space is what is the initial sort of portal for, I think, what you're talking about, the question of, how does the viewer relate to this, or how could the viewer connect to this work and have some sort of experience? So I think it's what I try to do is I try to make the work ambiguous enough so that it could be sort of digested a bunch of different ways, but I also try to make it specific enough so that someone would walk into the exhibition or see the painting and kind of know that this work was centered around the landscape or centered around maybe some sort of environmental concern. And I think I do that through the kinds of shapes and images. I'm working with this sort of the shape language that, at least to me, it makes sense that that a long skinny shape could represent maybe a fractured a part of a tree or a tree limb, or that a sort of a squiggly ink shape might represent like oil sort of bubbling out of a pipe. And so I try to, I guess to make a long story short, is I try to play that by orchestrating kind of how specific something is or how kind of up for interpretation it is. And I hope that some of the pieces at least maybe are that like hook, you know, it sort of maybe hooks the viewer in a way to giving some sort of insight, which would then maybe prompt them to consider more, or to consider what they're thinking about environmentalism or climate or whatnot.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any questions?
We do have a question from Facebook. Juan Lopez Bautista asks, how do your titles interact with your art pieces? If you'd like, Bryce and Maja, I can reshare the presentation so you guys can talk through some of those if you'd like.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. So I don't know who wants to go first.
I can go. I'm sorry.
I would just talk, so.
Okay, so in many of my pieces, the title relates to the location. So Night at Corina. Corina is a very small former mining town in Tasmania. It's in the middle of wilderness, and right now it's just a very small guest house, and you can rent kayaks there and kayak on the river, and it's a really remote and wild place. There was a lot of logging going on there in the 19th century, early 20th, but that's an additional story. But anyway, locations are the key to the titles. Olympic is inspired by the Olympic National Park in Washington State, which is a temperate climate rainforest. Spectacular forest full of mosses. And Eureka is a former plantation in the island nation of Mauritius, which was first. It never had indigenous population. It was first inhabited by the Dutch, and then French, and then the British, and now it's an independent country. So Eureka was a French sugarcane plantation. Now it's a museum, and it's parts of Eureka plantation. It's a semi-pristine jungle visited by tourists who want to take some photographs, usually.
Yeah, I think my titles are very intuitive. I keep a running list in the studio, and I almost think of them as sort of titling songs on an album. I try to pick one sort of little part out of a painting, and then make a title based on that. For example, Recoil is about my fear of snakes, and Razzle is I'm not really sure what Razzle was. That was sort of I think I was thinking of this as almost looking like a disco in nature or something. So it had this sort of like strange, shimmery, almost like fins or something. So that was a little bit more playful, but I do enjoy maybe titles that are sometimes even a little misleading or a little playful at times. but yes, I keep a running list, and then sometimes a painting, again, it's very intuitive. Sometimes a painting sort of titles itself, and then sometimes I run to my list to see what that could be. The one on the right is about, I used to work at when I was a freshman in college, I worked at a museum and I gave tours. And one of the things that I had to say was that the family that founded the museum had a lumber company, and they were famous in the early 1920s for sending 1 million board feet down the Leaf River. So that was about this sort of like wiping out of a lot of timber in South Mississippi at that time. So they come from various places, but most often related to sort of like one little part of the painting or one sort of branch of the concept that I started with.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Last call for questions.
I have a question. It's Pat Kilberg. Bryce, I was really interested in your use of the phrase shape language. And so I have a two-part question. Is your shape language always derived from something real or your imagination? And two, do you have a line language?
You know, it typically does evolve from something that is real, or I should say, yeah, real or close to real. I was sort of thinking about this earlier. There's the flame shape, which is almost always a flame, but that it sort of relates to like a burn off valve. If you've ever seen those, there's several down around the Gulf where from the oil wells and the gas wells, the excess burn, there's a tall pipe, and then the flame, there's a burn off. And then the eye and the circle for me frequently go together. The eye being a sort of symbol for like magnification of an issue or examination or self-examination in some of the pieces. Not all of my pieces are environmental. Some of them are more internal. And then again, as I was saying, there's sort of the branch or the tree shape, which is usually a tree shape, but sometimes it's a body limb shape. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Do you have a line language?
Line language. I like that idea a lot. I don't know that I have gotten that far yet, but I'm really intrigued by the idea of a line language. I think as a person, as an artist, I think I love line. I think I'm somehow, whatever this means, I think I'm a little bit more in tuned naturally first to shape and then maybe second to line. And that might be why I haven't quite done that. But I like that idea. I'm going to take that as a suggestion and think about it in the future.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Ben, anything else on Facebook or the chat?
I have a question.
Barbara?
My question is for Maja. I don't know if
Hi,
you remember,
Barbara.
but many years ago, I was your student.
I know, so wonderful to see you.
Good to see you too. I always remember when you would talk about your travels that you would tell us that you weren't interested in going to, not so interested in going to the touristy areas, but more so connecting with the people of the areas and finding out what was interesting to them. And finding like the local places. And now that you're talking about the project that you're working on in 2019 about people's personal experiences with the place. So what I've noticed in these new works, when I saw the show, was that you're including figures within the landscapes that I haven't seen in any of your work that I've seen before. So what is, making you include the figures now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think at some point when I traveled to look at other things, I realized that I'm part of a big crowd of people who are doing pretty much the same. Being in places such as, for example, Rome. I went there to look at the architecture. I was working on a project related to artifacts more than nature, and I realized I'm part of this choreography of people that are getting up in the morning and just invading the city with their electronic devices and taking photographs of things and using the environment as a backdrop for their selfies. So I started to really look at them, and I think this moment prompted this whole new body of work, looking at people looking at things and looking at things through the electronic device and validating the experience by sharing it. So I think that's the figure in the paintings right now. So they are kind of some of the figures are my alter ego in a way. I don't feel in any way superior by observing them, looking at them, including them. But still, I try to, I think most of us think that maybe when we travel, we are a little bit better travelers than the average, but I think we all think that. So are we really? But yeah, I do try to connect with people who live in places like the travel in Mauritius. I was there for almost 2 months, and I was living with a family. It was an artist in residence program run by a Mauritian couple, and we did a performance on a public beach that involved a lot of international and local artists. And I was visiting a lot of resorts just to look at tourists, but it's very interesting in those places, this big separation between the high-end resorts and local community, and there's not too much interaction besides this very well-organized interaction. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, I'm sorry. But yes, the people are the observers, but they are not present in the scrolls. The installations there are no people in them. It's just the nature as a place to contemplate. But I think with those people with their electronic devices, I think my observation was also such that we miss so much when we try to look at the world through the viewfinder, that the most interesting things happen behind our back or outside of the viewfinder. So I think it's part of it too.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Wonderful. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say I enjoyed hearing both your journeys on how you got here, and just love the reminder for us to really slow down and look at the work and take it all in. Because I think often even when we come to a gallery, we have a timetable. So when I come see the artwork, I will slow down.
That's what a wonderful way to end. Thank you, Laird.
Yeah.
So many good messages tonight. Thank you all for being part of this talk. Thank you so much, Maja and Bryce. We are privileged to have you in our gallery and to be able to show your work to our community and continue to bring things that they can't see anywhere else. So we can't tell you enough how much we appreciate the work, but also your time this evening to share a little bit about what goes on behind it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening. Hope to see you at the Art Center soon.